They said I was ungrateful. That I'd thrown away every advantage, every opportunity, every dollar my father had offered me. That I'd chosen a life of poverty and violence over privilege and comfort. That I was a disappointment, a failure, an embarrassment to the Ashford name. But what they didn't know, what my father didn't know as he stood in his tailored suit at the Riverside Club, champagne in hand, telling his business partners that his daughter was playing soldier like it was a phase, was that I had just returned from 8 months in the Persian Gulf. 8 months of coordinating humanitarian relief efforts that saved over 3,000 lives. 8 months that would earn me a Navy Commendation Medal and a promotion to lieutenant commander. And what he definitely didn't know was that in 72 hours, a Navy helicopter would land on the lawn of his charity gala, in front of 500 of Connecticut's wealthiest elite, and everything he'd said about me would become the lie that destroyed his carefully constructed reputation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The last time I saw my father was 3 years ago, at my grandfather's funeral. The chapel was filled with Navy officers in dress whites, their medals gleaming under soft lights, standing at attention as Rear Admiral Thomas Brooks was laid to rest with full military honors. My grandfather, my hero, the man who taught me that service meant something bigger than yourself, was being honored by the very institution my father had spent my entire life mocking. I stood in my service dress blues, my own medals pinned to my chest, as the honor guard folded the flag with crisp, precise movements. Each fold was deliberate, reverent. When they handed it to me, not to my father, but to me, the granddaughter who had followed in the Admiral's footsteps, I felt my father's eyes burning into the side of my face. After the service, while officers and dignitaries offered their condolences, my father pulled me aside into the chapel's side room. The space smelled of old wood and lilies. Through the frosted glass window, I could see the blurred shapes of people moving, talking in hushed tones. "You know he left you something," my father said without preamble. "No, how are you?" No acknowledgement of the 8 months I'd just spent deployed. "Just business." "I know," I replied quietly. My grandfather had told me years ago, the last time I'd visited him at the Veterans Hospital. His hands had been thin, spotted with age, but his grip had been strong when he'd held mine. "Natalie," he'd said, his voice still carrying that commanding officer tone even weakened by illness, "I'm leaving you my sword. The one I carried as a young officer, the one that saw me through Korea and Vietnam. It's not about the medal or the history. It's about what it represents, the continuation of service, of honor. You understand that, don't you?" I had understood. The sword wasn't just a family heirloom. It was a symbol of a legacy that stretched back 4 generations of Brooks men and women who had served. My great-great-grandfather had carried it in World War II. My great-grandfather in Korea. My grandfather in Vietnam. And he wanted me to have it. But standing in that chapel side room, my father's face was tight with barely contained anger. "A sword," he said, practically spitting the word. "He left you a rusty old sword and some medals. Do you know what he left Brandon?" Brandon. My younger brother. The golden child who had followed my father into finance, who played golf at the country club every Sunday, who drove a BMW that cost more than most people's annual salary. "I don't care what he left Brandon," I said evenly. "The investment portfolio," my father continued as if I hadn't spoken. 50 years of carefully managed stocks, bonds, real estate holdings. Worth approximately $4 million. That's what he left your brother. And you get a sword." The way he said it made it sound like I'd been given trash. Like my grandfather's most prized possession, the symbol of his entire life service, was worthless. "That sword means more to me than any amount of money," I said, and I meant it. My father laughed. It was a sharp, bitter sound that echoed off the chapel walls. "Of course it does. You always were more interested in playing hero than building a real life. Do you know how embarrassing it is, Natalie? Do you know what people say when they ask about my children and I have to tell them my daughter is enlisted?" "I'm an officer," I corrected quietly. "Lieutenant. And soon to be promoted to lieutenant commander." He waved his hand dismissively. Officer, enlisted, it's all the same. You're government property. You make barely enough to survive. You live in some cramped apartment near a military base. You risk your life for a country that will forget your name the moment you're gone. Each word was designed to cut, and years ago, they would have. But I'd spent the last 8 years in the Navy. I'd coordinated disaster relief in the Philippines after a typhoon. I'd served on a destroyer in the Mediterranean. I'd led a team through hostile territory to evacuate American civilians. I knew my worth, and it had nothing to do with my father's approval. Grandfather was proud of me, I said simply. Something flickered across my father's face, anger, maybe, or something closer to jealousy. Your grandfather was a stubborn old man who never understood that the world had moved on. Military service was important in his generation, Natalie. But this is the 21st century. Real power comes from wealth, from influence, from connections. Not from, he gestured vaguely at my uniform, playing dress-up and following orders. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice level. Years of military discipline had taught me control. Is there something specific you wanted to discuss, Dad? Because I have a flight back to Norfolk in 3 hours. Norfolk, he repeated with disdain. Yes, back to your little life. Well, don't expect any help from me when you finally realize what a mistake you've made. Don't come crawling back when you're 35 and realize you've wasted your youth on nothing. I won't, I assured him. He studied me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. Not softening, my father didn't soften, but a kind of cold calculation. Your brother is getting married next month, he said. Big ceremony at the Riverside Club. 500 guests. The Vanderbilts will be there, the Prescotts, the Fairchilds. Everyone who matters in Greenwich. I assume you'll be too busy with your military obligations to attend? The way he said it made it clear what he wanted. He didn't want me there. The daughter in the military uniform, with her government salary and her practical haircut, would be an embarrassment next to Brandon and his finance world friends. I'll be deployed, I said, which was true. I'd already received my orders. 8 months in the Persian Gulf, leading a humanitarian assistance team. Relief flashed across his face, quickly masked. Of course. Well, duty calls, as they say. He straightened his tie, preparing to return to the reception. I'll make your excuses to your brother. He left without another word. No hug, no handshake, no acknowledgement of the fact that I'd be spending the next 8 months in a region where actual violence was a daily reality. Just the click of his expensive shoes on the chapel floor and the soft close of the door. I stood there alone, the folded flag heavy in my arms, and made a decision. I was done trying to earn his respect. Done trying to make him see that service mattered, that some things were bigger than money and status. He'd made his choice about who I was, and I'd made mine about who I wanted to be. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known as I left that chapel and boarded my flight back to Norfolk, was that my father's disdain was about to deepen into something far worse. And the sword my grandfather left me? That was about to become the center of a betrayal that would test every ounce of discipline and restraint the Navy had taught me. 3 weeks after the funeral, I was aboard the USS Chancellorsville, a Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser, steaming toward the Persian Gulf. My quarters were small, just enough room for a bunk, a desk, and a locker, but they were mine. I'd tacked a photo of my grandfather in his dress whites above my desk, his eyes clear and proud. The deployment was intense from day one. Our mission was technically classified, but it involved coordinating humanitarian relief efforts in Yemen, where years of conflict had created a crisis that most Americans never heard about. We worked with NGOs, local officials, and other Navy units to deliver medical supplies, food, and clean water to populations that had been cut off by fighting. My team consisted of 12 people, logistics specialists, medical personnel, communications experts. We worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. The heat was crushing, the conditions difficult, and the threat of violence always present. But every time we successfully coordinated a supply drop, every time we helped evacuate sick children to hospitals, every time we made a difference, I thought of my grandfather's words, Service means something bigger than yourself. I didn't have much time to think about home. The occasional email from fellow officers, brief video calls with friends when bandwidth allowed. The Navy became my family, my team, my brothers and sisters. We celebrated birthdays with Marie's and terrible coffee. We traded books and movies. We told stories about our lives before the service, our plans for after. Lieutenant Derek Chin, my second in command, became one of my closest friends. He was from San Francisco, the son of immigrants who'd built a small restaurant from nothing. He joined the Navy to pay for college and discovered he loved the structure, the purpose, the clarity of the mission. "Your family military?" he asked me one night as we reviewed supply manifests in the operations center. It was 0200, the ship quiet except for the hum of engines and the soft beeping of equipment. "My grandfather was," I said. "Rear Admiral. Korea and Vietnam." Derek whistled low. "That's serious legacy. Your dad serve?" I smiled tightly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. No. My father thinks military service is for people without better options. Ouch. Derek set down his tablet. "Let me guess, he's in finance? Real estate development. Very successful. Very wealthy. Very disappointed in his daughter." "His loss," Derek said simply. "You're one of the best officers I've served under. This relief operation? We've saved lives, Natalie. Thousands of lives. That matters more than whatever your dad thinks matters." I appreciated Derek's loyalty, but talking about my father left a bitter taste. So I changed the subject, and we went back to work. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known while I was coordinating supply drops and negotiating with local officials and trying to save lives in a war zone, was that back in Greenwich, Connecticut, my father was making his own plans. Plans that involved my grandfather's sword, my brother's wedding, and a lie so calculated it would have made my grandfather ashamed to share the same blood. The deployment lasted 8 months. 8 months of heat and dust and the constant weight of responsibility. 8 months of small victories and frustrating setbacks. 8 months of missing home but knowing I was exactly where I needed to be. When we finally received orders to return stateside, my team celebrated with contraband chocolate someone's family had mailed and warm soda from the ship stores. We'd accomplished our mission. The after-action reports praised our efficiency, our coordination, our results. I'd been recommended for commendation. "You're going to make commander before you're 35, Derek predicted as we watched the sun set over the Gulf, painting the water in shades of orange and red. And then captain. And then Admiral Brooks, just like your grandfather." "Maybe," I said, though the pride in my chest was undeniable. Not pride in rank, but pride in what we'd accomplished. The lives saved. The missions completed. The difference made. "What's the first thing you're going to do when we get back?" Derek asked. I thought about it. Sleep in a real bed. Eat real food. And go see the sword my grandfather left me. My father was supposed to have it appraised and stored properly. I want to see it, hold it. Remember why I do this. Derek nodded, understanding. Family legacy. That's important. Yeah, I agreed. It is. But I should have known better. I should have remembered that my father measured importance in dollars and status, not sentiment and honor. I should have remembered that to him, I was an embarrassment. And embarrassments needed to be managed, controlled, erased if possible. We docked at Norfolk Naval Station on a gray October morning. The pier was crowded with families, banners waving, children bouncing with excitement. I scanned the crowd out of habit but didn't expect to see anyone. My father wouldn't come. My brother was busy with his new wife. My mother, well, Mom had checked out of active parenting when I'd enlisted, choosing to support my father's disappointment rather than acknowledge my choices. But there, near the back of the crowd, I spotted a familiar face. Ethan. My cousin, 6 months younger than me, was waving with a huge grin. Ethan was the one family member who'd never made me feel less than for my choices. He'd always been the rebel, the one who'd gone to art school instead of business school, who'd disappointed Uncle Robert just as thoroughly as I'd disappointed my father. I grabbed my duffel and made my way down the gangplank. The moment my boots hit solid ground, Ethan pulled me into a tight hug. "Welcome home, cousin," he said. "You look good." "Tired, but good." 8 months deployed will do that, I laughed. "What are you doing here?" "I didn't tell anyone I was coming back today." Ethan's smile faltered slightly. "I have some things I need to tell you. Things about your dad. And about Brandon's wedding." Something cold settled in my stomach. "What things?" "Not here," Ethan said, glancing around at the crowded pier. "Let me buy you the worst coffee in Virginia Beach and we'll talk." 30 minutes later, we sat in a dingy coffee shop near the base. The coffee was, as promised, terrible. But Ethan's expression was serious, and I felt my instincts sharpening, the same instincts that had kept me alert during 8 months in a conflict zone. "Brandon's wedding was huge," Ethan began. "Like, stupid huge. 500 people, ice sculptures, a 12-piece orchestra. Dad said Uncle Richard spent close to $500,000 on it." I sipped the bitter coffee. "Sounds like Dad." "Yeah, well, here's the thing." Ethan pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos. "I was there. And I saw something that's been bothering me for months. I tried to reach you, but you were deployed and I couldn't get through." He turned the phone toward me. The photo showed Brandon and his new wife Vanessa on the dance floor, surrounded by guests in expensive formal wear. Everything looked perfect, the flowers, the lighting, the smiles. Then Ethan swiped to the next photo. A close-up of Vanessa, radiant in her wedding dress. And there, hanging from Brandon's dress uniform, I froze. My brother wasn't military. He'd never served a day in his life. But he was wearing what looked like a Navy officer's dress uniform, complete with medals and insignia. And at his side, in a ceremonial scabbard, hung a sword. My grandfather's sword. "Tell me that's not what I think it is," I said, my voice eerily calm. Ethan's face was grim. "I confronted your dad about it. Casually, asked why Brandon was wearing a Navy uniform when he'd never enlisted. And your dad laughed. He said it was theatrical, that Brandon wanted to honor the family's military tradition on his wedding day." My hands tightened around the coffee cup. The family's military tradition. The one he spent my entire life mocking. "It gets worse," Ethan said quietly. I asked about the sword. "And your dad said, Natalie, I'm so sorry, he said you'd given it to Brandon as a wedding gift. That you'd decided the sword should stay with the Ashford name, not the Brooks name. That you'd moved on from military life and wanted your brother to carry on the family legacy instead." The coffee shop seemed to tilt. I set down my cup carefully, afraid I might crush it. "He said I gave it to Brandon. He told everyone that. Said you were too busy with your deployment to attend the wedding but that you'd sent the sword with your blessing. People were talking about how generous you were, how selfless." Generous. Selfless. The same words my father had used at the funeral, dripping with sarcasm. Now he was using them to rewrite history, to take the one thing my grandfather had left me, the symbol of 4 generations of service, and give it to his golden child, the son who'd never worn a uniform for anything except a staged photo opportunity. "Natalie?" Ethan's voice was concerned. "Are you okay?" I wasn't okay. I was the opposite of okay. But 8 years in the Navy had taught me how to function through crisis, how to keep my voice level and my expression neutral even when everything inside me was screaming. "Did you take any other photos?" I asked. Ethan nodded, swiping through his phone. "Yeah. I had a feeling this wasn't right. I got pictures of Brandon in the uniform, close-ups of the sword, even some video of your dad giving a toast where he talks about military tradition and family legacy." "Send them to me," I said. "All of them." "Already done. I sent them to your email months ago." I pulled out my own phone, a cheap smartphone I'd bought specifically for deployment, since I'd needed something I wouldn't care about losing or breaking. I hadn't checked personal email in weeks. When I opened it now, I found Ethan's message, dated from 6 months ago. "Natalie, call me when you can. Something's not right." I scrolled through the photos. Brandon in full Navy dress whites, medals he hadn't earned pinned to his chest. My grandfather's sword at his hip. My father standing beside him, beaming with pride he'd never shown me. And in every photo, people celebrating, toasting, admiring the family tradition. A tradition built on a lie. "There's more," Ethan said hesitantly. "I've been keeping tabs on your dad's social media. He's been posting about Brandon's military honor and the family sword. He even had an article written about it in the Greenwich Times, some puff piece about maintaining military traditions in modern families. Your name isn't mentioned once." I stared at the photos, feeling something cold and sharp crystallizing in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Anger was hot, reactive, uncontrolled. This was different. This was the same clarity I felt before a difficult mission, when emotions had to be set aside and strategy had to take over. My father had stolen from me. Not just an object, but a legacy. He'd taken my grandfather's final gift and given it to Brandon like it was a costume prop. He'd lied to everyone we knew, rewriting history to erase my service and elevate his favorite child. And he'd done it because he thought I wouldn't fight back. Because I was deployed, because I was busy, because I was too far away and too focused on my mission to do anything about it. He thought I'd be silent. He was wrong. I sat in that coffee shop for another hour, scrolling through every photo Ethan had sent. Each image was another layer of betrayal. Brandon posing with the sword like he'd earned it. My father's hand on his shoulder, pride radiating from every pixel. Guests admiring the family heirloom that Brandon was now carrying forward. The Greenwich Times article with its glowing praise of how the Ashford family honored military tradition through Brandon's symbolic gesture. Symbolic. As if wearing a uniform you hadn't earned and carrying a sword you'd never been given was anything more than theater. Ethan watched me carefully, nursing his terrible coffee. "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer immediately. My mind was already working through scenarios, calculating options. The Navy had taught me to assess situations methodically, to separate emotion from strategy. What were my objectives? What resources did I have? What were the obstacles? Objective: reclaim what was mine. Not just the sword, but the truth. Resources: evidence. Ethan's photos. My grandfather's will, which I had a copy of in my storage unit. My own service record, which spoke for itself. And soon, potentially, a Navy Commendation Medal that would make my father's lies even more transparent. Obstacles: my father's wealth, his connections, his ability to spin any narrative. Brandon's complicity. The fact that half of Greenwich society had witnessed what they believed was my generous gift. And most significantly, the fact that I was about to be recommended for a commendation that would bring media attention that could either help or hurt, depending on how I played this. "Natalie?" Ethan prompted again. "I'm going to get it back," I said simply. "The sword, the truth, all of it." "How?" I met his eyes. Carefully. Quietly. "And when the time is right, very publicly." Ethan grinned, but there was concern beneath it. "Your dad's not going to just hand it over. He'll fight you. He has lawyers, money." "I have something better," I interrupted. "I have the law on my side. That sword was left to me in a legal will. My grandfather's wishes were clear and documented. And I have proof that Brandon is currently in possession of stolen property. Your dad will say you gave it to him willingly. Then I'll prove otherwise." I pulled up my email, searching for the message I needed. I never sent Brandon a wedding gift. I was deployed without reliable mail access. I have my service records showing I was in the Persian Gulf during his wedding. I have my financial records showing no purchase or shipping of any gift. And most importantly, I found what I was looking for. I have an email I sent to the estate lawyer 3 weeks after the funeral, confirming receipt of the will and asking about the process for claiming the sword. Ethan leaned over to read the screen. The email was brief, professional, exactly what a deployed officer would send, requesting information about storage and insurance for a valuable heirloom until she returned stateside. The lawyer's response confirmed that the sword would be held in secure storage at Ashford Manor until Lieutenant Brooks could collect it in person. So the sword was supposed to be in storage, Ethan said slowly. But instead, your dad gave it to Brandon. Without my knowledge or permission. That's called theft, even if the thief is your father. I took a long drink of cold coffee, grimacing at the taste but needing the caffeine. My body was still adjusting to being back on solid ground, to a time zone that didn't match my internal clock. But my mind was sharp, focused, running through scenarios like I was planning a mission. I need to see the will, I said. The original, not just my copy. And I need to document everything, every lie my father told, every time he claimed I'd given the sword willingly. Can you help me with that? Already on it, Ethan said, pulling out a small notebook. I've been keeping track. Your dad's mentioned the gift at 3 different country club events. He told the story to the Greenwich Times reporter. He posted about it on Facebook twice. And Brandon's used it in at least 5 Instagram posts, talking about honoring family legacy and carrying forward tradition. I felt a grim satisfaction. Good. The more they publicize the lie, the harder it falls when the truth comes out. When are you going to confront them? Not yet. I checked my phone's calendar. I have to report back to Norfolk in 3 days for debriefing. After that, I'll find out about the commendation. If it goes through, and my commander seems confident it will, there'll be a ceremony. Media coverage. The Navy loves good press, especially for humanitarian missions. Understanding dawned on Ethan's face. You're going to wait until you have maximum visibility. I'm going to wait until the truth will do the most good, I corrected. This isn't about revenge. It's about justice. My grandfather served his country with honor for 30 years. That sword represents his legacy, and my father turned it into a prop for a wedding photo op. That needs to be corrected. Ethan nodded slowly. You've changed. I mean, you were always tough, but this is different. You're colder. More calculating. The Navy teaches you to think strategically, I said. To assess situations without emotion clouding your judgment. My father thinks I'm too busy or too far away to fight back. He's wrong. And by the time he realizes that, it'll be too late. We spent the next hour going through everything Ethan had collected. He'd been thorough, photos from multiple angles, screenshots of social media posts, even a recording of my father's toast at the wedding where he talked about military heritage, while standing next to his son in a borrowed uniform. It was almost funny, in a dark way. My father had mocked my service for years, but the moment he could use it for social credit, for appearances, he'd wrapped himself in it like a flag. When we finally left the coffee shop, the sun was setting over Virginia Beach. The sky turned orange and pink, reminding me of sunsets over the Persian Gulf. Ethan walked me back to my car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic that had been sitting in storage while I was deployed. Where are you staying tonight? He asked. I have an apartment near base. It's small, but it's home. You need anything? Company? Bad TV and good pizza? I smiled, genuinely this time. Rain check. I need to sleep for about 16 hours and then start processing all of this. Ethan hugged me again, tight and brief. I'm glad you're home safe. And I'm glad you're going to fight this. Your grandfather would be proud. After he left, I sat in my car for a long moment, engine running, heat slowly filling the cold interior. I pulled up the photos again, studying my brother's face. Brandon looked happy in these pictures. Proud. He'd always been the favorite, the one who did everything right in my father's eyes. And now he had something else that should have been mine. But I wasn't angry at Brandon. Not really. He was just playing the role he'd always played, the golden child, the heir to the Ashford fortune, the son who made our father proud. He probably didn't even understand what the sword meant, what it represented. To him, it was just another expensive prop, another way to impress wedding guests. No, my anger was reserved for my father. He knew. He understood exactly what that sword meant to me, what my grandfather had intended. And he'd taken it anyway, because in his mind, I didn't deserve it. I'd chosen wrong, lived wrong, valued the wrong things. And people who made wrong choices didn't get to keep precious heirlooms. I drove to my apartment in silence, no radio, just the sound of tires on pavement and my own breathing. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it 8 months ago, small, sparse, functional. 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, a living room barely big enough for a couch and TV. My landlord had checked on it periodically, made sure the pipes didn't freeze in winter. Otherwise, it had sat empty, waiting. I dropped my duffel by the door and walked through the space, reacquainting myself with stability. No more ships rocking. No more constant engine hum. No more sleeping in a rack so narrow you couldn't roll over. This was luxury by comparison, even if the whole apartment could fit inside my father's master bathroom. The refrigerator was empty except for some questionable condiments. The pantry held a few cans of soup and a box of stale crackers. I'd have to go shopping tomorrow. But tonight, I just wanted to be still, to let my body remember what it felt like to be home. I showered, letting hot water pound against muscles that had been tense for 8 months. Then I wrapped myself in a bathrobe I'd forgotten I owned and stood in front of the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was thinner than before deployment, her face more angular. There were lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there before. But her gaze was steady, clear. I thought about what Ethan had said, * you've changed. You're colder. More calculating. * maybe he was right. Deployment did that, stripped away the unnecessary, left only what mattered. And what mattered now was reclaiming what had been stolen, correcting the lies, honoring my grandfather's wishes. Everything else was just noise. My phone buzzed. A text from Derek, * made it home okay? ***, yeah. Weird being back. ***, always is. Give it a few days. Want to grab dinner this week? ***, definitely. I'll text you. ***, I set the phone down and climbed into bed. Real sheets. A real pillow. Space to stretch out. It felt almost obscenely comfortable after months in a rack. But sleep didn't come easily. My mind kept circling back to the photos, to my father's lies, to the sword hanging at Brandon's hip like it belonged there. Eventually, I got up and opened my laptop. I pulled up the photos Ethan had sent and created a folder, organized and labeled. Then I drafted an email to the estate lawyer, professional and brief, * Mr. Harrison, I hope this message finds you well. I'm writing regarding the estate of Rear Admiral Thomas Brooks. Specifically, I need to verify the current location and status of the ceremonial sword left to me in his will. I was deployed during the settling of the estate and am now following up to arrange for its collection. Please confirm at your earliest convenience where the sword is currently stored and what steps I need to take to claim it. Thank you for your assistance. Respectfully, Lieutenant Commander Natalie Brooks, USN *. I read it 3 times, checking tone and clarity, before hitting send. It was nearly midnight. The lawyer wouldn't see it until morning. But it was a start, official documentation that I was asking about the sword, that I hadn't given it away, that I expected to claim what was mine. Then I opened a new document and began writing down everything I knew, everything I could prove, everything I would need. Dates, witnesses, documentation. The will. The estate lawyer's original confirmation. My deployment records. Ethan's photos. Social media posts. The Greenwich Times article. By 2 a.m, I had a timeline that read like a mission brief: Admiral Brooks dies. Will names me as recipient of sword. I'm deployed but email lawyer to confirm receipt and ask about storage. Lawyer confirms sword will be held securely. 4 months later, while I'm still deployed and unreachable, Brandon's wedding occurs. Brandon wears Navy uniform he didn't earn. Brandon carries sword that wasn't his. Father tells guests I gifted it to Brandon. Father tells press Brandon is honoring family military tradition. Social media posts amplify the lie. I return from deployment, discover theft. I contact lawyer to verify. It was clear, documented, irrefutable. And it painted my father as exactly what he was, a liar and a thief who'd stolen from his own daughter while she was serving her country. I saved the document, closed my laptop, and finally slept. The next morning, I woke to 3 emails. The first was from my commanding officer, confirming debriefing time for Monday. The second was from Derek, sending a terrible meme about Navy coffee. The third was from Mr. Harrison, the estate lawyer. I opened it with my heart pounding. Lieutenant Commander Brooks, thank you for your inquiry. I must confess some confusion regarding your question. According to my records, the ceremonial sword was released from estate storage approximately 6 months ago. At that time, Mr. Richard Ashford presented documentation indicating you had authorized the transfer of the sword to your brother, Brandon Ashford, as a wedding gift. The documentation included what appeared to be your written consent, though I noted at the time that it was not notarized. Given the family relationship and Mr. Ashford's assurances, I released the item to him. If there has been some misunderstanding, please contact my office at your earliest convenience to discuss this matter. I have copies of all relevant documentation. Sincerely, James Harrison, attorney at law. I read the email twice, then a third time. Written consent. Documentation that appeared to be from me. My father had forged my signature. The coldness that had been building since yesterday solidified into something harder, sharper. This wasn't just theft or lies. This was fraud. My father had created false documentation, impersonated me, and used that forgery to steal property from an estate. That was a crime. Not just morally wrong, but legally actionable. I typed a response, keeping my tone professional despite the fury building beneath. Mr. Harrison, I can state with absolute certainty that I provided no such authorization. I was deployed to the Persian Gulf during the time period in question, with limited communications access. I sent no written consent, signed no documents, and had no knowledge that the sword was being transferred. I would very much like to see the documentation Mr. Ashford presented, as I believe it may be fraudulent. I am currently stateside and available to meet at your office this week. Please let me know your availability. This matter is of significant importance to me. Respectfully, LCDR Natalie Brooks, USN*. I sent it before I could second-guess the wording. Then I forwarded the entire email chain to Ethan with a brief message, he forged my signature. This just became a legal matter. Ethan's response was immediate, holy shit. What are you going to do? Meeting with the lawyer. Getting copies of the forgery. Then deciding next steps. Need backup? Not yet. But soon. I spent the rest of the morning doing mundane things, grocery shopping, laundry, trying to readjust to a normal schedule. But my mind kept circling back to that email. My father had been so confident I wouldn't find out, wouldn't fight back, wouldn't care enough to pursue this. He'd gambled that his version of events would become reality through sheer repetition. He'd gambled wrong. By afternoon, Mr. Harrison had responded with available meeting times. I chose the soonest option, Thursday at 10 in the morning. 2 days away. 2 days to prepare, to gather my thoughts, to decide exactly how I wanted to handle this. Because there were multiple paths forward now. I could go to the police, report the forgery, let the legal system handle it. I could confront my father directly, demand he return the sword or face consequences. Or I could wait, gather more evidence, and time my revelation for maximum impact. The strategic part of my brain, the part that had been honed by 8 years of military service, said wait. Be patient. Build an airtight case. Then strike when it would do the most good. But there was another part of me, smaller but growing, that wanted immediate action. That wanted to call my father right now, tell him I knew what he'd done, watch him scramble to justify the unjustifiable. I compromised. I would meet with the lawyer, get copies of the forged documents, verify the full extent of my father's deception. Then I would make a plan. A real plan, not an emotional reaction. That evening, I called Derek. "You busy?" Never too busy for my favorite lieutenant commander. "What's up?" "I need to talk through something. Strategically. Like a mission." "I'm intrigued." "Pizza and planning at my place?" "Perfect." Derek lived in a small house near the base that he shared with 2 other officers. It was chaotic in the way military households often are: mismatched furniture, walls covered with unit patches and photos, a kitchen that looked like 3 people had tried to cook 3 different meals simultaneously and given up halfway through. But it felt like home in a way my sterile apartment didn't. We sat on his back porch with pizza and beer, and I told him everything. The sword, the will, my father's lies, Brandon's wedding, the forged documentation. Derek listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as the story unfolded. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Then, your dad forged your signature while you were deployed?" "Yes." "To steal an heirloom your grandfather specifically left you?" "Yes." "And then lied about it to everyone, claiming you'd willingly given it away?" "That's the situation." Derek took a long drink of beer. "Okay. So here's what we're dealing with. This is theft, fraud, and possibly identity theft depending on how the forgery was executed. Legally, you have him dead to rights. But," he held up a hand when I started to speak, "this is also your family. Public legal action will burn every bridge, permanently. So the question is, what's your objective? What do you actually want out of this?" It was exactly the right question. Not what did I deserve, or what would feel good, but what did I actually want to achieve? "I want the sword back," I said slowly, thinking through each point. "I want the lies corrected. I want people to know I didn't give it away, that I was serving my country while my father was stealing from me. And I paused, surprised by the clarity of the feeling. I want my grandfather's legacy protected. He served with honor. That sword represents something real. And my father turned it into a costume piece for social media photos. So reclaim the sword, correct the record, honor your grandfather's memory," Derek summarized. "Those are your objectives. Now, resources and timing." This was why I'd called Derek. He thought like I did: mission first, emotions contained, strategy paramount. Resources: I have the will, my grandfather's clear intentions documented. I have my deployment records proving I couldn't have consented to any transfer. I have the estate lawyer who can confirm my father presented forged documents. I have photographs of Brandon wearing the sword at his wedding. I have social media posts and news articles repeating my father's lies. And soon, hopefully, I'll have a Navy Commendation Medal and a promotion that will generate positive press coverage." Derek nodded. "That last part is key. If you're about to be publicly recognized for humanitarian service, saving actual lives, it creates a hell of a contrast with your father's stolen valor bullshit." "Sorry," he added, "is that too harsh?" "It's accurate. Brandon wore a uniform he didn't earn, carrying achievements he didn't accomplish, representing service he never gave. That's the definition of stolen valor." "Okay. So timing. When's the commendation ceremony?" "Not confirmed yet, but likely within the next month." "So you have a window. Here's what I'm thinking: use that time to build your case airtight. Get the forged documents from the lawyer. Maybe consult with JAG," he meant the Judge Advocate General's Corps, military lawyers, "about your legal options. Document everything. Then, when you have all your ducks in a row and you're about to receive public recognition for actual military service, you drop the truth bomb." "Maximum contrast," I said quietly. "Maximum contrast," Derek confirmed. You're being honored for saving lives in a war zone while your rich daddy was back home stealing from you and lying about it. The optics alone will destroy his credibility. It was calculating. Cold, even. But it was also just. My father had gambled that I wouldn't fight back, that I was too far away or too busy or too tired to challenge his narrative. He'd gambled that his wealth and connections would let him rewrite reality. I was going to prove him wrong. We spent another hour working through details. Derek suggested I document everything in writing, every conversation, every email, every piece of evidence. He recommended I loop in my chain of command, make sure they knew about the situation before it potentially became public. And he offered to be there, whatever I needed, whenever I needed it. You're not fighting this alone, he said firmly. You've got your team. Always. That meant more than he probably realized. The Navy had become my family in ways my biological family never had. These people had my back not because of blood or obligation, but because of shared values and mutual respect. By the time I left Derek's house, I had a plan. Meet with the lawyer Thursday. Get copies of everything. Consult with JAG about my legal options. Wait for confirmation about the commendation. Build an ironclad case. Then, when the time was right, when I had maximum visibility and credibility, tell the truth. Not in anger. Not in revenge. But in the steady, undeniable voice of someone who had earned her authority through service and sacrifice. My father thought military service made me poor, made me less than. He was about to learn that it had made me something else entirely, someone who wouldn't back down, wouldn't be silenced, and wouldn't let lies stand unchallenged. The next 2 days passed in a strange blur of normalcy and anticipation. I reported to Norfolk for debriefing, spent hours going through after-action reports, answered questions about the humanitarian mission. My commanding officer pulled me aside afterward. Lieutenant Commander Brooks, I wanted to give you a heads up. Your recommendation for the Navy Commendation Medal has been approved. Ceremony is tentatively scheduled for 3 weeks from now. There will likely be media coverage. The humanitarian aspect makes for good press. I hope you're prepared for some attention. My heart rate kicked up, but I kept my expression neutral. Understood, sir. Thank you. You earned it, Brooks. What you and your team accomplished out there, 3,000 lives saved, by the most conservative estimates. That matters. That's why we do this job. 3,000 lives. I'd been too busy during deployment to really think about the numbers in aggregate. But hearing it stated so clearly, 3,000 people who were alive because of the work we'd done, it put everything else in sharp perspective. My father had spent $500,000 on my brother's wedding. Money spent on flowers that wilted, food that was eaten, a party that was forgotten within a week. I'd spent 8 months in a combat zone saving 3,000 lives. Which one of us understood real value? Thursday morning arrived cold and gray. I dressed carefully, civilian clothes, professional but not formal. I wanted to look like someone who should be taken seriously, someone who knew her rights and wouldn't be pushed around. Mr. Harrison's office was in downtown Norfolk, in one of those old buildings that tried to look prestigious with dark wood paneling and oil paintings of stern-looking men in wigs. The receptionist was polite, efficient, and showed me into a conference room within 5 minutes of my arrival. Mr. Harrison was older than I'd expected, maybe 70, with white hair and a neat beard. He stood when I entered, shaking my hand firmly. Lieutenant Commander Brooks. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for seeing me on short notice. He gestured to a chair, and we both sat. On the table between us was a manila folder. I've pulled all the documentation related to your grandfather's estate and the transfer of the ceremonial sword, he said, his tone carefully neutral. Before we proceed, I want to be clear, I had no reason to suspect any impropriety at the time of the transfer. Your father presented what appeared to be appropriate authorization, and given the family relationship, I felt comfortable releasing the item. I understand, I said. I'm not questioning your judgment. I'm questioning my father's honesty. Something flickered in Harrison's eyes, perhaps approval of my directness. He opened the folder and slid a document across the table. This is what your father presented. I looked down at the paper. It was typed, professional looking, dated from 6 months ago, right when I'd been deployed and largely unreachable. It read, I, Natalie Brooks, hereby authorize the transfer of the ceremonial naval sword inherited from Rear Admiral Thomas Brooks to my brother, Brandon Ashford, as a wedding gift. This sword was left to me in my grandfather's will, and I freely choose to give it to my brother to honor our family's military tradition on his wedding day. Signed, Natalie Brooks. Below the text was a signature. My name, written in handwriting that looked almost like mine. Almost, but not quite. The N was wrong, too looped. And I always crossed my T's with a slight upward tick. This signature didn't. This isn't my signature, I said quietly. Harrison leaned forward, studying the document. Are you certain? Completely. I pulled out my military ID and a credit card, both with my signature clearly visible. Compare them. He did, pulling out a magnifying glass and examining the signatures carefully. After a long moment, he sat back. You're right. The differences are subtle, but they're there. This appears to be a forgery. My father forged my signature to steal property from his father's estate, I said, letting each word land with weight. While I was deployed and serving my country. Harrison's expression darkened. This is a serious accusation, Lieutenant Commander. I know. That's why I need copies of everything, this document, any communications you had with my father, any other paperwork related to the transfer. I need a full paper trail. May I ask what you intend to do with this information? I met his eyes steadily. I intend to get my grandfather's sword back. And I intend to make sure the truth is known. Harrison nodded slowly. I'll make copies of everything. But Lieutenant Commander, I feel obligated to warn you, if you pursue this legally, it will likely destroy your relationship with your father permanently. Family lawsuits are. He paused, choosing words carefully, rarely clean or simple. I understand. But my father made his choice when he forged my signature. I'm just making sure there are consequences. He stood, gathering the documents. I'll be right back with those copies. While he was gone, I sat in that conference room and thought about consequences. My father had always been insulated from them. His wealth, his connections, his carefully maintained reputation, they protected him from ever having to face the results of his actions. Not this time. Harrison returned with a thick envelope. Everything you requested. Copies of the forged authorization, my correspondence with your father, the original will provisions. I've also included my contact information should you need me to provide testimony or additional documentation. Thank you. I took the envelope, heavy with paper and implications. One more question. When my father presented this authorization, did he seem at all hesitant? Did anything about the interaction strike you as odd? Harrison considered. He was quite confident, actually. Very matter of fact. Presented the document, explained that you wanted your brother to have the sword for his wedding, said you'd called him from your deployment to arrange it. He seemed to believe his own story entirely. Or he's a very good liar. Perhaps both, Harrison said quietly. I left his office with the envelope clutched in my hand and clarity singing through my veins. I had everything I needed now. The forged document. The lawyer's testimony. My own proof that I'd been deployed and unreachable. The will itself, clear and unambiguous. All that remained was deciding exactly when and how to use it. I drove back to my apartment, spread everything out on my small dining table, and took photographs of each document. Then I uploaded them to a secure cloud storage, backed them up on a hard drive, and emailed copies to myself and Ethan. If my father somehow tried to make evidence disappear, I had multiple redundancies. Then I pulled out my phone and composed a text to my commanding officer, Sir, I have a personal legal matter that may potentially attract media attention. Would it be possible to schedule a brief meeting to discuss how to manage this appropriately? His response came within 10 minutes, my office, tomorrow 0900. Asterisk the Navy didn't like surprises, especially not ones that might reflect poorly on the service. Better to brief my chain of command now, make sure they understood the situation and knew I was handling it professionally. That evening, I sat on my small balcony with a beer and my phone, scrolling through my father's social media. He'd posted again just yesterday, a throwback photo from Brandon's wedding, my brother in his stolen uniform, the caption reading, asterisk so proud of the Ashford legacy. Family honor continues. Asterisk the comments were full of praise. Asterisk beautiful tradition. What a handsome family. So wonderful to see young people honoring military service. Asterisk lies upon lies upon lies, each one building on the last, creating a false reality that everyone believed because why would a wealthy, respectable man like Richard Ashford lie about something like this? I took a screenshot, added it to my growing file of evidence, and made a decision. I wouldn't confront my father privately. I wouldn't give him the chance to spin another lie, to claim misunderstanding, to throw money at the problem until it disappeared. I would wait. I would be patient. And when I finally spoke, it would be with the full weight of truth, evidence, and military honor behind me. My father had called me poor military trash. Had mocked my service, dismissed my choices, stolen my inheritance. Soon, the whole world would know exactly what kind of man he really was. And I would stand there in my uniform, with my medals earned through actual service, and let the contrast speak for itself. 3 weeks. 3 weeks until the commendation ceremony. 3 weeks to finalize my strategy, coordinate with legal counsel, prepare for the storm that was coming. My phone buzzed. A text from Derek, asterisk how'd the meeting go? Asterisk got everything I needed. Now I wait. Asterisk the hardest part of any mission. Asterisk yeah. But I'm good at waiting. Asterisk and I was. The Navy had taught me patience, discipline, the ability to stay focused on the objective even when emotions ran hot. My father thought I was reactive, emotional, impulsive, all the things he associated with his disappointment in me. He was about to learn he was wrong about that, too. I finished my beer, watched the sun set over Virginia Beach, and felt something settle inside me. Not peace, exactly. But purpose. Clear, undeniable purpose. The countdown had begun. The meeting with my commanding officer went exactly as I'd anticipated. Captain Warren was a pragmatic woman in her late 40s, with 2 decades of service and a reputation for handling difficult situations with surgical precision. She listened to my explanation without interrupting, her expression neutral as I laid out the facts, the stolen sword, the forged signature, my father's public lies, and the potential for media attention when the truth emerged. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me for a long moment. You understand this could get messy, she said finally. Family drama involving fraud, stolen valor, adjacent behavior, all happening right as you're receiving a commendation. The press loves conflict. Yes, ma'am. That's why I'm briefing you now. I don't want the Navy blindsided. Appreciated. She tapped her pen against her desk, thinking. Here's my concern, we're about to publicly recognize you for exemplary humanitarian service. That's good press for the Navy, the kind we need. But if this family situation explodes at the same time, it could overshadow the actual story. The media might focus on the drama instead of the mission. I'd considered that possibility. With respect, ma'am, I think the 2 stories actually reinforce each other. My service speaks for itself. The theft and lies demonstrate exactly why that service matters. It's a clear contrast between real military values and someone using military imagery as a prop. Warren's mouth quirked slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. You've thought this through. I've been planning it like a mission. Good. Because here's what's going to happen. You're going to consult with JAG before you take any public action. You're going to make sure everything you do is legally sound and by the book. You're going to keep me informed of any developments. And when the commendation ceremony happens, you're going to let your service record speak louder than any family conflict. Understood? Understood, ma'am. One more thing, Brooks. Her tone softened slightly. I read your after-action reports from the Gulf. What you accomplished out there was extraordinary. Don't let your father's betrayal diminish that. You saved thousands of lives. That's the story that matters. Something tight in my chest loosened slightly. Thank you, ma'am. Dismissed. And Brooks? Go talk to Jag today. I want this handled properly. I spent 3 hours that afternoon in the Judge Advocate General's office, sitting across from Commander Helen Rodriguez, a Navy lawyer with sharp eyes and sharper questions. I walked her through everything: the will, the deployment timeline, the forged authorization, my father's public claims, the social media posts, the news article. Commander Rodriguez took meticulous notes, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting to see specific documents. When I finished, she sat back and steepled her fingers. This is straightforward from a legal standpoint, she said. Your father committed fraud. He forged your signature to obtain property that was legally yours. That's a criminal offense. Additionally, by having your brother wear a military uniform he didn't earn and claim military honors he doesn't possess, they've ventured into stolen valor territory. But the Stolen Valor Act has specific requirements, I said. I'd researched this extensively. It only applies if someone falsely claims to have received specific military decorations for financial gain. True. But there's a broader issue of fraud and misrepresentation. Your father used false claims about military service to enhance his family's social standing, which has a value even if it's not directly financial. And the forgery itself is clear-cut. She pulled up something on her computer. Here's what I recommend: file a police report about the forgery. That creates an official record. Simultaneously, send your father a formal legal demand for the return of the sword, citing the will and the forged documentation. Give him a deadline, say, 10 days. If he doesn't comply, you can pursue civil action for recovery of stolen property. What about criminal charges for the forgery? That's up to the district attorney. But having a police report establishes the facts officially. Even if the DA doesn't prosecute, and often they don't in family matters unless there's significant financial harm, you have documentation that law enforcement investigated and found your claims credible. I absorbed this. So I create an official paper trail. Police report, legal demand letter, documented evidence. Then if he refuses to return the sword, I have everything I need for civil court. Exactly. And here's the tactical advantage. Once there's an official police report and legal demand, your father can't claim this is just a misunderstanding or family disagreement. It's documented fraud. If he continues to publicly claim you gave him the sword willingly, he's doubling down on a lie that's been officially refuted. Which makes him look worse. Significantly worse. Especially if you're simultaneously being recognized for actual military achievement. Rodriguez's expression was neutral, but I caught a hint of satisfaction in her tone. She understood exactly what I was doing. I left the JAG office with a clear action plan and a referral to a civilian attorney who specialized in estate disputes. By the end of the week, I had filed a police report in Greenwich, Connecticut, my father's jurisdiction, detailing the forged signature and theft of inherited property. The officer who took my report was professional but clearly uncomfortable with the family dynamics. This is a civil matter, really, he said, echoing what I'd expected. Estate disputes usually are. But the forgery aspect is concerning. We'll investigate and include it in our report. That's all I'm asking for. An official investigation and documentation. 2 days later, I received a copy of the police report. The investigating officer had contacted Mr. Harrison, who confirmed the signature discrepancy. The report concluded that there was probable cause to believe a forgery had occurred, and recommended the matter be referred to the district attorney. Whether the DA would actually prosecute was uncertain, but the official finding was what mattered. Armed with that report, my civilian attorney drafted a formal demand letter. It was beautifully written, the language both precise and damning. Mr. Ashford, this letter constitutes formal legal demand for the immediate return of property unlawfully obtained through fraudulent means. Specifically, the ceremonial naval officer's sword bequeathed to Lieutenant Commander Natalie Brooks by Rear Admiral Thomas Brooks, which was removed from estate storage through use of forged authorization bearing Lieutenant Commander Brooks' signature. As documented by Greenwich Police Department Case Number, redacted, an investigation has established probable cause that the authorization you presented to Estate Attorney James Harrison was fraudulent. The sword in question is the legal property of Lieutenant Commander Brooks, as clearly specified in the last will and testament of Rear Admiral Brooks. Your continued possession of this property constitutes theft. You have 10 days from receipt of this letter to return the sword to Lieutenant Commander Brooks in its original condition. Failure to comply will result in civil litigation for recovery of stolen property, as well as potential criminal prosecution for fraud and forgery. Additionally, any continued public statements claiming Lieutenant Commander Brooks willingly transferred this property may constitute defamation and will be addressed accordingly. Asterisk: the letter was sent via certified mail, requiring my father's signature upon receipt. I would know the exact moment he received it, the exact moment he realized his daughter wasn't going to quietly accept his theft. While I waited for my father's response, I continued preparing for the commendation ceremony. The Navy Public Affairs Office reached out to coordinate media coverage. They wanted to do a feature story about the humanitarian mission, highlighting the lives saved and the logistics involved. They asked if I'd be willing to do interviews. Absolutely, I told the public affairs officer, a cheerful lieutenant named Martinez. I'd be honored to talk about the mission and my team's work. Great. We've got interest from Navy Times, obviously, but also the Virginian Pilot and possibly CNN. The humanitarian angle is really resonating. CNN. National coverage. I felt a grim satisfaction. The bigger the platform, the starker the contrast would be when the truth about my father emerged. Whatever you need from me, I said. This mission mattered. The team deserves recognition. You're making my job easy, ma'am. Most officers hate media attention. I've got nothing to hide. The certified mail tracking showed my father signed for the demand letter on a Tuesday morning. I imagined him in his home office at Ashford Manor, probably reviewing quarterly reports or planning his next real estate acquisition. The doorbell ringing, the postal worker handing over the slim envelope. My father's signature, casual and unconcerned. Then opening it, reading, and realizing exactly what his daughter had done. My phone rang 3 hours later. Unknown number, Greenwich area code. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, another call. Same area code, different number. Voicemail again. Then a third call, and this time I recognized the number as my childhood home. I didn't answer. Let him sit with it. Let him feel what it was like to be ignored, dismissed, unable to reach someone who was supposed to care. The voicemail he left was illuminating. Natalie, this is your father. I received a very disturbing letter from some lawyer today, making ridiculous accusations. I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is completely inappropriate. Family matters should be handled within the family, not through threats of legal action. The sword was a gift. Everyone knows that. You're embarrassing yourself and the Ashford name with these baseless claims. Call me immediately so we can resolve this like adults. I saved the voicemail. Added it to my evidence file. He just made several critical mistakes. First, he'd acknowledged receiving the letter, establishing timeline. Second, he'd doubled down on the lie that the sword was a gift, despite knowing about the police investigation. Third, he tried to frame this as my embarrassment, my inappropriate behavior, when he was the one who'd committed fraud. Classic Richard Ashford. Confronted with wrongdoing, he reframed himself as the victim of unreasonable attacks. I didn't call back. Instead, I forwarded the voicemail to my attorney with a brief note. He's continuing to claim it was a gift despite being informed of the police investigation. Her response was immediate, perfect. He's establishing a pattern of knowingly false statements. Save everything. Over the next week, my father tried every method of contact he could think of. Phone calls from different numbers. Emails to my Navy address, which was technically a violation since it was supposed to be for official business only. Even a message passed through Ethan, asking me to be reasonable and think about the family. I responded to none of it. Silence was its own kind of power, and I was wielding it deliberately. Each unreturned call, each ignored email, was a message: I'm not playing your games. I'm not negotiating. I have the law on my side and I'm prepared to use it. Meanwhile, the commendation ceremony preparations continued. The Navy Times interview went well. The journalist, a former Marine who understood military culture, asked thoughtful questions about the humanitarian mission's logistics, the challenges we'd faced, the impact we'd had. I talked about my team's expertise, the coordination required, the moment when we'd successfully evacuated an entire village ahead of incoming hostilities. You must be proud, the journalist said. I'm proud of my team. I'm proud of what the Navy enables us to do. We take an oath to protect and serve, and sometimes that means humanitarian work is just as important as combat readiness. Your grandfather was Navy, correct? Rear Admiral Thomas Brooks? I felt my spine straighten. Yes. He served for 30 years. Korea, Vietnam, and peacetime operations. He taught me that service was about something bigger than yourself. Would he be proud of what you've accomplished? The question hit harder than expected. I thought about my grandfather's hands, aged and spotted, pressing the velvet box into mine. His voice saying, "This sword is for you, Natalie. For when you understand what service really means." I hope so, I said quietly. I think he would be. The article ran 3 days later, time to precede the commendation ceremony. It was beautifully written, focused on the mission's impact and my team's dedication. There was a photo of me in uniform, standing on the deck of the Chancellorsville with the Persian Gulf stretching behind me. I looked competent, confident, professional. The comments section filled quickly. Veterans thanking me for representing the Navy well. Civilians expressing appreciation for humanitarian work. And then, buried about halfway down, a comment that made my blood run cold. Isn't this the same Natalie Brooks whose brother Brandon got married last year? I was at that wedding. Brandon wore a Navy uniform too, said he was honoring family tradition. Didn't realize his sister was active duty. Small world. I took a screenshot immediately. Then I watched as other commenters began responding. Wait, the brother wore a uniform but isn't military? That's stolen valor, isn't it? I know the Ashford family. Brandon definitely never served. Why would he wear a uniform? Maybe it was just for photos? Lots of people do themed weddings. Seems disrespectful if his sister is actual Navy and he's playing dress up. The conversation was beginning. Not fully formed yet, just questions and speculation. But it was starting. The cognitive dissonance of seeing my genuine service juxtaposed with Brandon's costume was creating exactly the questions I'd anticipated. I sent the screenshot to Commander Rodriguez. Her response: let it percolate. Don't engage. The truth will surface on its own now that people are paying attention. She was right. Over the next few days, more people began commenting. Someone found Brandon's Instagram and shared photos of him in the Navy uniform at his wedding. Someone else found my father's Facebook posts about family military tradition. The questions grew more pointed. Why is the father posting about military tradition when only the daughter served? Those medals on the brother's uniform don't look right. Anyone with military knowledge want to weigh in? The whole thing feels like they're using military imagery for clout while the actual veteran gets ignored. A veterans advocacy group picked up the thread. They posted about the importance of distinguishing between genuine service and military cosplay, using Brandon's wedding photos as an example without naming names directly. Their followers weren't as subtle. This is the Ashford family from Greenwich, Connecticut. The father is Richard Ashford, real estate developer. The son Brandon never served but wore a Navy uniform to his wedding. Meanwhile, the daughter Natalie is an actual lieutenant commander who just got recognized for saving thousands of lives. The disrespect is unreal. The narrative was forming exactly as I'd calculated it would. The contrast was too stark to ignore, genuine service versus borrowed imagery. A daughter deployed in a war zone while her family stole her inheritance and pretended military connection. My father must have seen it too. The calls increased in frequency, the voicemails more urgent. Natalie, people are saying terrible things online. You need to release a statement. You need to tell them this is a misunderstanding. The family is being attacked because of your refusal to communicate. But I didn't release any statement. I didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. The 10-day deadline I'd given my father came and went. The sword was not returned. My attorney filed papers in civil court, formally suing Richard Ashford for recovery of stolen property and damages. The filing included the will, the police report, the forged authorization, and my deployment records proving I couldn't have consented to any transfer. The lawsuit became public record immediately. Local Connecticut news picked it up within hours. Greenwich real estate mogul sued by daughter over stolen military heirloom. The story wrote itself. Navy officer returns from humanitarian deployment to discover her father forged her signature and stole a ceremonial sword left to her by her grandfather, a decorated rear admiral. While she was saving lives in the Persian Gulf, her family was staging photo opportunities with stolen military honors. By evening, it had gone regional. By the next morning, national outlets were covering it. The story had everything: military service, family betrayal, stolen heirlooms, forged documents, and the perfect villain in my wealthy, privileged father who'd mocked his daughter's service while exploiting it for social status. CNN called my public affairs office requesting an interview. So did MSNBC, Fox News, and a dozen other outlets. Lieutenant Martinez contacted me, slightly overwhelmed. "Ma'am, the media requests are significant. How do you want to handle this? What does Captain Warren recommend?" She says it's your call, but she suggests limiting it to 1 or 2 interviews with reputable outlets. Keep the focus on your service and the facts of the case. Don't let it become a circus. Agreed. I'll do CNN since they're already covering the commendation story. And maybe 1 print interview with someone who'll be thorough and fair. The Washington Post has requested access. They're known for solid military coverage. Perfect. Set those up. The CNN interview was scheduled for 2 days before the commendation ceremony. They wanted to do it at Norfolk Naval Station, in uniform, with my service record and the humanitarian mission as backdrop. The contrast would be implicit but powerful. Here is real military service, real sacrifice, real honor. I spent hours preparing with a media consultant the Navy provided. We practiced answers, anticipated difficult questions, worked on keeping my responses focused and professional. Don't let them make this about family drama, the consultant advised. Every answer should circle back to service, sacrifice, and honoring your grandfather's legacy. The facts are on your side. Let them do the heavy lifting. What if they ask about my relationship with my father? You say, this isn't about our relationship. This is about honoring the clearly stated wishes of a rear admiral who served his country for 30 years. The sword he left me represents a legacy of service. That legacy matters more than family politics. We rehearsed until my answers felt natural, until I could pivot from any question back to the core message: service matters, truth matters, honor matters. The night before the CNN interview, Derek came over with Thai food and moral support. We ate on my balcony, watching the sun set over Virginia Beach, the sky turning shades of orange and purple that reminded me of the Gulf. "You ready for tomorrow?" he asked. "I think so. I've prepared as much as I can. Your dad's going to lose his mind when this airs. You know that, right? This isn't just local embarrassment anymore. This is national news. His reputation, his business relationships, everything he's built on being respectable and trustworthy, it's all going to be questioned." "Good," I said simply. Derek studied me. "You've really changed. I don't mean that as criticism. But the Natalie I knew 2 years ago would have been conflicted about this. Would have felt guilty about the consequences. 2 years ago, I hadn't spent 8 months in a war zone. I hadn't coordinated missions that saved thousands of lives. I hadn't been reminded every single day that actions have consequences and truth matters. I set down my food. My father forged my signature while I was serving my country. He stole something my grandfather specifically left to me. And then he lied about it, repeatedly, publicly. Those are his choices. I'm just making sure they have appropriate consequences. And if he reaches out? If he tries to settle? Then we settle. He returns the sword, he issues a public statement admitting the truth, and we're done. But he has to acknowledge what he did. No more lies. No more spinning. He won't, Derek predicted. Men like your father don't admit fault. They double down. They blame others. They throw money at problems until they go away. The conversation was beginning. Not fully formed yet, just questions and speculation. But it was starting. The cognitive dissonance of seeing my genuine service juxtaposed with Brandon's costume was creating exactly the questions I'd anticipated. I sent the screenshot to Commander Rodriguez. Her response: let it percolate. Don't engage. The truth will surface on its own now that people are paying attention. She was right. Over the next few days, more people began commenting. Someone found Brandon's Instagram and shared photos of him in the Navy uniform at his wedding. Someone else found my father's Facebook posts about family military tradition. The questions grew more pointed. Why is the father posting about military tradition when only the daughter served? Those medals on the brother's uniform don't look right. Anyone with military knowledge want to weigh in? The whole thing feels like they're using military imagery for clout while the actual veteran gets ignored. A veterans advocacy group picked up the thread. They posted about the importance of distinguishing between genuine service and military cosplay, using Brandon's wedding photos as an example without naming names directly. Their followers weren't as subtle. This is the Ashford family from Greenwich, Connecticut. The father is Richard Ashford, real estate developer. The son Brandon never served but wore a Navy uniform to his wedding. Meanwhile, the daughter Natalie is an actual lieutenant commander who just got recognized for saving thousands of lives. The disrespect is unreal. The narrative was forming exactly as I'd calculated it would. The contrast was too stark to ignore: genuine service versus borrowed imagery. A daughter deployed in a war zone while her family stole her inheritance and pretended military connection. My father must have seen it too. The calls increased in frequency, the voicemails more urgent. Natalie, people are saying terrible things online. You need to release a statement. You need to tell them this is a misunderstanding. The family is being attacked because of your refusal to communicate. But I didn't release any statement. I didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. The 10-day deadline I'd given my father came and went. The sword was not returned. My attorney filed papers in civil court, formally suing Richard Ashford for recovery of stolen property and damages. The filing included the will, the police report, the forged authorization, and my deployment records proving I couldn't have consented to any transfer. The lawsuit became public record immediately. Local Connecticut news picked it up within hours. Greenwich real estate mogul sued by daughter over stolen military heirloom. The story wrote itself. Navy officer returns from humanitarian deployment to discover her father forged her signature and stole a ceremonial sword left to her by her grandfather, a decorated rear admiral. While she was saving lives in the Persian Gulf, her family was staging photo opportunities with stolen military honors. By evening, it had gone regional. By the next morning, national outlets were covering it. The story had everything: military service, family betrayal, stolen heirlooms, forged documents, and the perfect villain in my wealthy, privileged father who'd mocked his daughter's service while exploiting it for social status. CNN called my public affairs office requesting an interview. So did MSNBC, Fox News, and a dozen other outlets. Lieutenant Martinez contacted me, slightly overwhelmed. "Ma'am, the media requests are significant. How do you want to handle this? What does Captain Warren recommend?" She says it's your call, but she suggests limiting it to 1 or 2 interviews with reputable outlets. Keep the focus on your service and the facts of the case. Don't let it become a circus. Agreed. I'll do CNN since they're already covering the commendation story. And maybe one print interview with someone who'll be thorough and fair. The Washington Post has requested access. They're known for solid military coverage. Perfect. Set those up. The CNN interview was scheduled for 2 days before the commendation ceremony. They wanted to do it at Norfolk Naval Station, in uniform, with my service record and the humanitarian mission as backdrop. The contrast would be implicit but powerful. Here is real military service, real sacrifice, real honor. I spent hours preparing with a media consultant the Navy provided. We practiced answers, anticipated difficult questions, worked on keeping my responses focused and professional. Don't let them make this about family drama, the consultant advised. Every answer should circle back to service, sacrifice, and honoring your grandfather's legacy. The facts are on your side. Let them do the heavy lifting. What if they ask about my relationship with my father? You say, this isn't about our relationship. This is about honoring the clearly stated wishes of a rear admiral who served his country for 30 years. The sword he left me represents a legacy of service. That legacy matters more than family politics. We rehearsed until my answers felt natural, until I could pivot from any question back to the core message: service matters, truth matters, honor matters. The night before the CNN interview, Derek came over with Thai food and moral support. We ate on my balcony, watching the sun set over Virginia Beach, the sky turning shades of orange and purple that reminded me of the Gulf. You ready for tomorrow? He asked. I think so. I've prepared as much as I can. Your dad's going to lose his mind when this airs. You know that, right? This isn't just local embarrassment anymore. This is national news. His reputation, his business relationships, everything he's built on being respectable and trustworthy, it's all going to be questioned. Good, I said simply. Derek studied me. You've really changed. I don't mean that as criticism. But the Natalie I knew 2 years ago would have been conflicted about this. Would have felt guilty about the consequences. 2 years ago, I hadn't spent 8 months in a war zone. I hadn't coordinated missions that saved thousands of lives. I hadn't been reminded every single day that actions have consequences and truth matters. I set down my food. My father forged my signature while I was serving my country. He stole something my grandfather specifically left to me. And then he lied about it, repeatedly, publicly. Those are his choices. I'm just making sure they have appropriate consequences. And if he reaches out? If he tries to settle? Then we settle. He returns the sword, he issues a public statement admitting the truth, and we're done. But he has to acknowledge what he did. No more lies. No more spinning. He won't, Derek predicted. Men like your father don't admit fault. They double down. They blame others. They throw money at problems until they go away. The legal definition of stolen valor is specific and applies to false claims about certain decorations. But there's a broader issue here about respecting military service. My grandfather earned the right to wear that uniform. I've earned the right to wear mine. My brother hasn't. Having him wear it at his wedding, while carrying a sword that was meant to honor actual service, felt like a betrayal of everything that uniform represents. Maria nodded slowly. What do you want people to understand about this situation? I want people to understand that military service means something. It's not a costume. It's not a prop for social media. It's years of your life dedicated to something bigger than yourself. It's missing holidays, birthdays, family events. It's being half a world away when your grandfather dies, unable to say goodbye in person. It's coming home to discover that the one thing he left you, the symbol of his life's work, has been stolen and turned into a decoration. My voice had gotten quieter, more intense. I took a breath, steadied myself. I'm pursuing this lawsuit not because I'm angry or vindictive. I'm pursuing it because truth matters. My grandfather's legacy matters. The distinction between real service and pretend service matters. And if I don't stand up for those principles, then everything I've served for means nothing. Maria wrapped up the interview with a few more questions about the commendation ceremony and my future plans. But the core message had been delivered, and I knew it would resonate. When the cameras stopped rolling, Maria shook my hand again. "That was powerful, Lieutenant Commander. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for letting me tell the truth." I left the studio feeling lighter somehow. The story was out there now, in my own words, with my own framing. Whatever my father tried to claim, whatever spin he attempted, my version, the truthful version, was now part of the public record. The interview would air that evening. Tomorrow, the Washington Post piece would run. And the day after that, I would receive my Navy Commendation Medal in a ceremony that would be covered by multiple news outlets, with photos and video of me in uniform with medals I'd actually earned. The contrast would be undeniable. And the truth would be inescapable. I drove back to my apartment, changed into civilian clothes, and did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out a box from the back of my closet, dusty and forgotten. Inside were photos from my childhood. Family vacations, holiday dinners, birthday parties. All the normal markers of a normal family. But looking at them now, I could see what I'd missed before. In every photo, Brandon was centered. Brandon opening the biggest present. Brandon blowing out the candles. Brandon receiving the trophy, the award, the praise. And there, in the margins, was me. Present but peripheral. Smiling but overlooked. Part of the family but never quite the focus. I'd spent so many years trying to earn my way into the center of those photos. Trying to achieve enough, accomplish enough, be enough to warrant the same attention, the same pride. The Navy had taught me something better. I didn't need to be in the center of their photos. I could be in the center of my own story. I closed the box and put it back in the closet. Then I sat down at my laptop and began writing. Not for publication, just for myself. A record of everything that had happened, everything I'd felt, everything I'd learned. The words flowed easily, surprising me with their clarity. I wrote about my grandfather's funeral, about the moment I'd realized my father would never value what I valued. I wrote about deployment, about the weight of responsibility and the satisfaction of success. I wrote about discovering the theft, about the cold anger that had crystallized into purpose. And I wrote about what came next. The ceremony, the vindication, the reclaiming of what was mine. But more than that, I wrote about freedom. The freedom that came from finally, completely, letting go of the need for my father's approval. The freedom of knowing my worth wasn't determined by whether he acknowledged it. By the time I finished writing, it was dark outside. My phone showed dozens of notifications, the CNN interview had aired, and social media was responding. I scrolled through some of the comments. This woman served her country while her family stole from her. The betrayal is unbelievable. The father should be prosecuted. This is fraud, plain and simple. The contrast between her actual service and the brother's costume is everything you need to know about this family. Lieutenant Commander Brooks is a class act. She could have gone scorched earth, but she's keeping it factual and focused on honoring her grandfather. Respect. My father's business accounts were getting flooded with critical comments. Someone had found his company's Yelp page and was leaving reviews mentioning his theft and fraud. The court of public opinion had rendered its verdict before any judge would. I set my phone down and walked out onto my balcony. The night air was cool, carrying the salt smell of the ocean. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, the Persian Gulf waters were reflecting different stars. My team was long gone, dispersed to new assignments. But the work we'd done remained. 3,000 people whose lives had been saved, whose futures had been preserved. That was what mattered. Not my father's approval. Not his lies or his theft. Not even the sword, though I would reclaim it. What mattered was the work. The service. The knowledge that I'd dedicated myself to something real. The rest was just noise. And in 2 days, when I stood in my dress blues receiving a commendation for genuine achievement, the whole world would see the difference between real honor and borrowed glory. My father had thought he could rewrite the story, steal my legacy, diminish my service. He was about to learn he'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. Because I wasn't the same girl who'd left for the Naval Academy 8 years ago, hoping for his pride. I was Lieutenant Commander Natalie Brooks. I'd earned my rank, my medals, my reputation through sweat and sacrifice. And I was done being overlooked. The Washington Post article ran the morning of the commendation ceremony. I woke early, my dress blues already pressed and hanging on the door, and read it over coffee while the sun rose over Virginia Beach. The journalist, a woman named Patricia Morales who'd spent 2 decades covering military affairs, had done her homework. The piece was thorough, meticulously researched, and devastating in its factual precision. She'd interviewed Mr. Harrison, the estate attorney, who confirmed on record that the signature on the authorization document didn't match my other legal signatures. She'd obtained quotes from the Greenwich police detective who'd investigated the forgery complaint. She'd even tracked down my grandfather's former commanding officer, now in his 80s, who spoke about the admiral's fierce pride in his granddaughter's service. But the most damaging elements were the ones my father had provided himself. Morales had found every social media post, every public statement, every news clipping where Richard Ashford had talked about his family's military tradition, while his daughter, the only one actually serving, went unmentioned. She'd compiled them into a timeline that read like a masterclass in hypocrisy. The article included side-by-side photos, me in uniform on the deck of the Chancellorsville during deployment, exhaustion and determination visible in my expression. And Brandon at his wedding in his costume uniform, smiling for cameras while carrying a sword he had no right to touch. The visual contrast needed no commentary. The images spoke their own indictment. Morales had reached out to my father for comment. His response, printed verbatim, was everything I could have hoped for. This is a private family matter being unnecessarily publicized by my daughter for reasons I don't understand. The sword was gifted to Brandon in a spirit of family unity. Natalie's decision to pursue legal action rather than discuss this privately is unfortunate and hurtful. I've always supported her military career, even when I've questioned her choices. To be accused of theft and fraud by my own child is devastating. Every sentence was a gift. He'd positioned himself as the victim while simultaneously admitting he'd questioned her choices, code for the years of dismissal and mockery. He'd called the lawsuit hurtful without addressing the actual accusation of forgery. And he'd claimed to have always supported my career in an article that documented his public silence about my service alongside his effusive praise of Brandon's military cosplay. The comments section was brutal. Military veterans, legal experts, and regular readers tore apart his statement with surgical precision. Someone had even created a Reddit thread titled, "Rich Dad Steals from Navy Daughter," a masterclass in missing the point, that had thousands of upvotes and hundreds of comments analyzing every aspect of the case. But it was the final paragraph of Morales's article that made me set down my coffee cup, hands suddenly unsteady. Lieutenant Commander Brooks will receive the Navy Commendation Medal this afternoon for her role in humanitarian operations that saved an estimated 3,000 lives. She will do so without her father present. When asked if she had any message for him, she responded simply, "I hope he'll read the citation. It might help him understand what service actually means." The citation will note that Brooks, while coordinating relief efforts under hostile conditions, demonstrated exceptional leadership, tireless dedication, and unwavering commitment to humanitarian principles. It's worth noting that these qualities were apparently insufficient to prevent her own family from stealing from her while she was deployed. The article had captured everything. Not just the facts of the case, but the deeper meaning. The betrayal wasn't just about a stolen sword. It was about a father who couldn't see his daughter's value because it was measured in service rather than status, in sacrifice rather than wealth. My phone started ringing before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. Reporters requesting interviews. Colleagues calling to express support. Even a few messages from people I hadn't heard from in years, old Naval Academy classmates who'd seen the news and wanted to let me know they were thinking of me. Derek texted, * that article was nuclear. How are you feeling? *** clear. Focused. Ready. *** good. Because today is your day. Don't let any of this family drama overshadow what you've earned. You saved 3,000 lives. Remember that. Asterisk, he was right. Today wasn't about my father or the lawsuit or the stolen sword. Today was about the mission, the team, the work that mattered. The commendation ceremony was scheduled for 1400 hours, 2 o'clock, at the Norfolk Naval Station Ceremonial Hall. My team members who were stateside would be there. My commanding officer would present the medal. And according to Lieutenant Martinez, there would be significant media presence. I spent the morning in careful preparation. Every element of my uniform had to be perfect. The creases in my trousers sharp enough to cut. The shoes polished to a mirror shine. Each ribbon placed with millimeter precision. This was more than just military protocol. It was armor. Visual proof that I'd earned every single element of what I wore. At noon, I drove to the base. The gate guard recognized me from the news coverage and offered a crisp salute that I returned with equal precision. Word had spread. I was no longer just another officer on base. I was the lieutenant commander whose father had stolen from her while she saved lives in a combat zone. The story had taken on a life of its own, bigger than just my personal situation. It had become a narrative about military values versus civilian hypocrisy, about genuine service versus borrowed glory. The ceremonial hall was already being set up when I arrived. Chairs arranged in precise rows, a small stage with podium, flags positioned according to strict protocol. Lieutenant Martinez found me backstage, clipboard in hand and slight stress visible around her eyes. "Ma'am, we've had to expand seating twice. We're expecting about 300 people now, plus media in the designated area. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and about a dozen local affiliates. This is significantly larger than typical commendation ceremonies. Because of the lawsuit." "Yes, ma'am. I won't lie, it's complicated, the messaging. But Captain Warren has been clear, today is about your service and your team's achievement. The personal situation is not part of the official ceremony." "Understood. I appreciate you managing all of this. It's my job, ma'am. And honestly," she lowered her voice slightly, "half the base is on your side. What your father did was unconscionable. People are showing up today partly to support you, yes, but also to make a statement about what we value in the military versus what civilians seem to think matters." The ceremonial hall began filling 90 minutes before the scheduled start time. I watched from backstage as people filed in. Active duty personnel in their dress uniforms, crisp and correct. Veterans wearing their old insignia with pride that time couldn't diminish. Local officials, other officers, Navy families. And there, in the third row, I spotted Ethan. He gave me a small wave when he caught my eye. But it was the empty seats that drew my attention. Front row, right side, 3 seats that remained conspicuously vacant even as the room filled beyond capacity. Standard protocol was to reserve front row seating for immediate family. Those 3 chairs, for father, mother, brother, sat empty as a silent testament to absence. Derek appeared at my elbow. "Those seats are going to photograph really well," he said quietly. "Empty chairs while you receive recognition for saving thousands of lives." The visual metaphor is perfect. I didn't plan it that way. I know. That's what makes it perfect. You didn't have to say anything. The empty chairs say it all. At 13:50, Captain Warren found me in the staging area. She was in her dress blues, her own chest full of ribbons earned over 20 years of service. "How are you holding up, Brooks?" "Ready, ma'am. Focused on the mission." She nodded approvingly. "Good. Because in about 10 minutes, you're going to walk out there and be recognized for extraordinary humanitarian service. Everything else, the lawsuit, the media circus, the family drama, that's all just noise. Today is about the work. About the lives saved. About the values we serve. Don't lose sight of that." "I won't, ma'am. Your grandfather would be proud." I never had the honor of serving with Admiral Brooks, but I've read his service record. He was the real deal. Old school Navy, dedicated to mission above all else. You've honored his legacy better than any sword ever could. Something tight loosened in my chest. Thank you, ma'am. That means more than you know. At 13:55, the ceremonial honor guard took their positions. At 13:58, the command was given to bring the room to attention. And at precisely 1400 hours, I walked onto that stage. The room was a sea of dress blues and dress whites, punctuated by civilians in formal attire. Camera flashes went off as I took my position center stage. The flags, American flag, Navy flag, unit flag, stood at attention behind me. Captain Warren stood to my right. The base chaplain, who would deliver the invocation, stood to my left. But my eyes went to those 3 empty seats. Front row, right side. The absence was louder than any presence could have been. The ceremony proceeded with military precision. The chaplain's invocation spoke of service and sacrifice. Captain Warren read the official citation, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. The Secretary of the Navy takes pleasure in presenting the Navy Commendation Medal to Lieutenant Commander Natalie M. Brooks, United States Navy, for service as set forth in the following. For meritorious achievement while serving as officer in charge of humanitarian assistance operations in support of Operation Enduring Promise from January to August. Lieutenant Commander Brooks coordinated complex multi-agency relief efforts under austere and occasionally hostile conditions, demonstrating exceptional leadership, tireless dedication, and unwavering commitment to humanitarian principles. Her efforts directly resulted in the successful delivery of critical medical supplies, food, and clean water to populations affected by ongoing regional conflict. Through her tactical expertise and diplomatic skill, Lieutenant Commander Brooks facilitated the evacuation of over 300 critically ill civilians to medical facilities, coordination of supply distribution reaching approximately 3,000 individuals, and establishment of sustainable logistics networks that continue to provide aid to vulnerable populations. Her actions reflected great credit upon herself and were in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. 3,000 individuals. Hearing the number stated officially, in the formal language of military commendation, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. 3,000 people who were alive because my team and I had done our jobs under conditions most people couldn't imagine. Captain Warren pinned the medal to my uniform, just above my other ribbons. The weight of it was minimal, just a bit of metal and fabric, but it felt significant. Earned. Real. Congratulations, Lieutenant Commander Brooks, she said formally, then dropped her voice to barely audible. Well done. Truly. The room erupted in applause. People stood, a standing ovation that went on for nearly 2 full minutes. I stood at attention, maintaining military bearing, but I couldn't stop my eyes from scanning the crowd. So many faces. So many people who had shown up to support me, to witness this moment, to stand in solidarity with the principle that genuine service mattered. And 3 empty chairs that spoke louder than any of them. When the applause finally subsided, protocol dictated a brief acceptance speech. I stepped to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at 300 people who had chosen to be here. Thank you, Captain Warren, Chaplain Davis, distinguished guests, fellow service members, and friends. I accept this commendation not as an individual achievement, but as recognition of what a dedicated team can accomplish when united by shared purpose. The humanitarian mission referenced in this citation was successful because of the expertise, dedication, and selfless service of 12 outstanding sailors who worked 18-hour days in difficult conditions without complaint. They coordinated logistics, provided medical care, managed communications, and solved problems that didn't have easy answers. I was privileged to lead them, but they made the mission possible. I paused, glancing at Derek and other team members scattered throughout the audience. My grandfather, Rear Admiral Thomas Brooks, taught me that military service was about something larger than personal ambition or recognition. He served for 30 years, through war and peace, always guided by the principle that the mission mattered more than individual glory. I think about his example often, especially during difficult deployments when the work is hard and the conditions are challenging. What would he do? How would he serve? What principles would guide his decisions? My voice had grown quieter, more personal. The room was utterly silent. This past year has taught me many things. It's taught me about the strength of teams working toward common goals. It's taught me about the satisfaction of making a tangible difference in people's lives. And it's taught me that the values we serve, honor, courage, commitment, those aren't just words. They're daily choices about who we want to be and what we want to stand for. I looked directly at the cameras in the media section. Some people value service. Some value appearance. Some value truth. Some value convenience. We each make choices about what matters most to us. Those choices define us far more than any title, any wealth, any social position. Today, I'm honored to stand here in the uniform I've earned through 8 years of service. I'm honored to wear medals that represent real missions and real impact. And I'm honored to represent an institution that values substance over image, sacrifice over comfort, and truth over expedience. The silence stretched for a moment longer. Then I concluded formally, to my team, thank you for your dedication and skill. To the Navy, thank you for the opportunity to serve. To everyone who supports our mission, your faith in us drives us to be better every single day. Thank you. More applause, but different this time. Not celebratory, but thoughtful. I'd said what needed saying without naming names, without explicitly addressing the situation with my father. But everyone in that room understood exactly what I meant. Values matter. Truth matters. Real service matters. The ceremony concluded with the traditional retiring of colors. As the honor guard performed their duties with practiced precision, I stood at attention, feeling the weight of the new medal on my chest alongside the others I'd earned over 8 years. Each one represented a mission, a deployment, a chapter of service. Each one was real. As the final notes of colors sounded and the room was released from attention, people began moving forward. A receiving line formed spontaneously, sailors and officers and veterans wanting to shake my hand, offer congratulations, express solidarity. I greeted each person with genuine gratitude, conscious of the cameras still recording, still documenting this moment. Ethan worked his way through the crowd, pulling me into a tight hug that probably violated protocol, but I didn't care. That speech, he said. Holy hell, Natalie. You didn't say his name, but everyone knew. Values matter. Truth matters. That was perfect. It's what I believe. I know. That's why it landed so hard. He pulled back, studying my face. How does it feel? I considered the question seriously. Right. It feels right. This ceremony, this recognition, these people, this is what matters. Not the lawsuit or the media attention or any of it. This. Derek appeared next, formal in his dress blues. Outstanding speech, ma'am. You threaded the needle perfectly. Honored the mission, acknowledged the team, made your point about values without making it personal. It wasn't personal. It's principle. That's what makes it so effective. Lieutenant Martinez hurried over, slightly out of breath. Ma'am, the media is requesting brief interviews if you're willing. Nothing long, just a few questions about the mission and the ceremony. CNN specifically asked about the humanitarian work. I glanced at Captain Warren, who had been approached by a Navy public affairs officer. She caught my look and gave a slight nod. Permission granted. 5 minutes each, maximum, I told Martinez. And only questions about the mission and military service. The lawsuit is a private legal matter. Understood, ma'am. The CNN correspondent was the same woman who'd interviewed me days earlier, Maria Chen. She positioned us near the flags, ensuring the visual was unmistakably military. Lieutenant Commander Brooks, congratulations on your commendation. How does it feel to be recognized for this humanitarian work? It feels like validation for my team's efforts. We worked hard under difficult conditions, and knowing that work has been officially recognized means a great deal. But more importantly, it highlights the Navy's commitment to humanitarian assistance. We're not just a combat force. We're also a force for good in crisis situations around the world. There were 3 empty seats in the front row during the ceremony. Can you comment on that? I'd expected this question. My focus today was on honoring the mission and the team that made it successful. Who attended or didn't attend is less important than what we accomplished together. But those seats were reserved for family. And my family is here. I gestured to the room full of people in uniform. My Navy family. The people who've served alongside me, who understand what this work means, who share these values. That's the family that matters. Maria's expression softened slightly. That's a powerful statement. Your speech mentioned your grandfather and his 30 years of service. Would you say his legacy influenced your career? Absolutely. My grandfather taught me that service was about something larger than yourself. That honor wasn't given, it was earned. That real leadership meant putting the mission and your people ahead of personal comfort or recognition. Those lessons have guided every decision I've made in the Navy. And you believe you've honored that legacy? I met her eyes directly. I believe I've tried to live up to the principles he demonstrated. Whether I've succeeded is for others to judge. But I can say with certainty that every medal on this uniform was earned through service and sacrifice. That matters to me. It would have mattered to him. The interview wrapped up quickly after that. Fox News asked similar questions, as did the local affiliates. I kept my answers focused, professional, always redirecting back to the mission and the values of service. By the time the last interview concluded, my voice was slightly hoarse and exhaustion was setting in. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the ceremony was fading, leaving behind the accumulated fatigue of weeks of preparation and stress. Captain Warren found me as the crowds began dispersing. Well handled, Brooks. You represented yourself and the Navy with distinction. Now go home, get some rest, and let the legal system handle the rest. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for everything. Thank you for your service. And Brooks? Don't check social media for at least 24 hours. Let the dust settle before you see how this is playing out publicly. Trust me on that. I appreciated the advice even as I knew I probably wouldn't follow it. I needed to know how the narrative was developing, what the public response was, whether my message had landed the way I'd intended. Ethan drove me back to my apartment, making idle conversation about the ceremony while I processed everything in silence. When we arrived, he offered to stay, to order food and provide company, but I declined. I needed quiet. Space. Time to decompress. Alone in my apartment, still in my dress blues, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. The ceremony had been perfect. The speech had said what needed saying. The media coverage would create exactly the contrast I'd sought. And through it all, those 3 empty chairs had spoken volumes about my father's priorities. He'd had the opportunity to show up, to support his daughter receiving recognition for saving thousands of lives, to demonstrate that he valued her service even if he didn't understand it. And he'd chosen absence. Chosen to stay away rather than face the public scrutiny his own actions had created. That choice told its own story. I carefully removed my uniform, hanging it with the same precision I'd used to put it on. Each element placed exactly where it belonged. The medals stored in their case, safe and honored. And there, in the center of that case, was space for one more item. A space that would remain empty until my grandfather's sword came home. Against Captain Warren's advice, I opened my laptop and began scrolling through social media. The ceremony footage was already circulating, clips of my speech going viral. The empty chairs had become their own meme, representing abandonment and betrayal. Someone had created a side-by-side comparison, me receiving the Navy Commendation Medal for saving 3,000 lives, and Brandon at his wedding in costume uniform with a stolen sword. The caption read, "Real service versus stolen valor. Real honor versus borrowed glory." The hashtag I Stand With Brooks was trending nationally. Veterans groups were sharing my story as an example of military values versus civilian hypocrisy. Legal commentators were analyzing the fraud case. And everywhere, people were asking the same question: how could a father steal from his daughter while she was deployed serving her country? My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, then saw it was a Connecticut area code and answered. Lieutenant Commander Brooks? This is James Harrison, the estate attorney. I wanted to inform you that I've been contacted by your father's legal representation. They're proposing a settlement. My pulse quickened. What are the terms? They're offering to return the sword immediately, along with compensation for legal fees and, this is the interesting part, a written apology acknowledging that the authorization was presented without your knowledge or consent. A written apology admitting the forgery was fraudulent? Not in those exact words, but the implication is clear. It's carefully worded, but it amounts to an admission that you never authorized the transfer. I thought about this carefully. A settlement meant the lawsuit would end. The sword would be returned. My father would have to publicly acknowledge some version of the truth. But it also meant he'd avoid the full trial, avoid having the evidence presented in open court, avoid the maximum public humiliation. What's the catch? I asked. The settlement would include a mutual non-disparagement clause. You couldn't make further public statements about the incident, and neither could he or your brother. Additionally, they're requesting that you issue a brief statement saying the matter has been resolved amicably. There it was. The exit he was trying to buy. Return the sword, offer some carefully worded quasi-apology, and make it all go away with enforced silence. I need to think about this, I told Harrison. How long do I have? They've requested a response within 48 hours. Your father is apparently under significant pressure from business associates and social connections. This story has done considerable damage to his reputation. He wants it resolved quickly. I'll bet he does. I'll review the proposed settlement and get back to you. After hanging up, I sat on my couch and stared at the wall. This was the moment of decision. Take the settlement, get the sword back, move on with my life. Or push forward to trial, ensure the full truth came out in court, but risk further months of legal battle and media attention. The strategic part of my brain said take the settlement. I'd accomplished my objectives, reclaimed the sword, forced a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, demonstrated the consequences of his actions. The non-disparagement clause would prevent him from continuing to spread lies, and I'd already made my point publicly. Mission accomplished. But there was another part of me, smaller but insistent, that wanted more. Wanted him in a courtroom, under oath, having to admit exactly what he'd done. Wanted the full legal consequences of forgery and fraud documented in court records. Wanted complete, unambiguous victory. I called Derek. Settlement offer just came through. Already? He must be desperate. I outlined the terms. Derek listened carefully, then asked the right question. What do you want, Natalie? Not what's strategic or practical. What do you actually want? I thought about my grandfather's sword, the weight of it, the history it carried. I thought about the 3,000 lives saved in the Persian Gulf, work that mattered more than any family drama. I thought about the empty chairs at today's ceremony, already iconic in their silent testimony. I want the sword back, I said slowly. I want him to admit he was wrong. And I want to be done with this so I can focus on my career and my life. I've made my point. The world knows what he did. Taking it to trial won't change that or make it more true. Then you have your answer. The settlement lets him off too easy. Does it though? Derek's voice was thoughtful. He's returning the sword under legal pressure. He's paying your legal fees. He's issuing a written apology, even if it's carefully worded. He's agreeing to never publicly dispute your version of events. And most importantly, his reputation is already destroyed. Everyone knows what he did. A trial might give you the satisfaction of watching him squirm under oath, but it won't change the fundamental facts that are already public knowledge. He was right. The court of public opinion had already rendered its verdict. The ceremony today, the empty chairs, the contrast between my earned commendation and Brandon's costume uniform, those images had done more damage to my father's reputation than any courtroom testimony could. I'll accept the settlement, I decided. But I want every word of that apology documented. I want it to be part of the public record. And I want the sword delivered within 72 hours. Done. I'll help you review the language to make sure there aren't any hidden clauses or loopholes. We spent the next 2 hours going through the proposed settlement line by line. Derek's military training had included some legal education, and he caught several phrases that could have been interpreted multiple ways. We drafted counterproposals, clarifying language, ensuring that the written apology would be substantive enough to matter. By the time we finished, it was nearly midnight. The final version required my father to state clearly that the sword had been taken without my knowledge or authorization, that he had presented documentation to the estate attorney that I had not created or signed, and that he acknowledged the sword was my legal property per Admiral Brooks's will. It stopped just short of using the word forgery, but the implication was impossible to miss. The settlement also required return of the sword within 72 hours, in its original condition, with full documentation of provenance. My father would pay all legal fees, both mine and Mr. Harrison's. And both parties would refrain from further public statements about the matter, with the exception of my right to confirm the sword had been returned and the matter resolved. That last clause was important. It meant I could acknowledge victory without giving details. My father couldn't spin the settlement as anything other than what it was, forced return of stolen property under legal pressure. I sent the revised settlement terms to my attorney with instructions to present them as final offer, non-negotiable. Then I finally allowed myself to sleep, still in my civilian clothes, too exhausted to even change. I woke to my phone ringing. Morning light streamed through the windows, harsh and unforgiving. The caller ID showed my attorney's office. Lieutenant Commander Brooks, they've accepted your terms. All of them. No pushback, no negotiation. Your father signed the agreement this morning. I sat up, suddenly fully awake. He accepted everything? Every clause, every word. The sword will be delivered to your address within 72 hours as specified. The written apology will be filed with the court as part of the settlement agreement, making it public record. And all legal fees will be paid within 30 days. You won. Completely. I should have felt triumphant. Vindicated. Satisfied. Instead, I felt something quieter. A sense of closure, perhaps. Of a door finally, definitively closing. Thank you, I told my attorney. For everything. You made my job easy, Lieutenant Commander. You had the law, the evidence, and the moral high ground. Your father never had a chance. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of my bed and let it sink in. It was over. The sword was coming home. My father had been forced to admit wrongdoing in writing, in public record. And I was free to move forward without the weight of unresolved betrayal. The news broke within hours. Media outlets reported that the lawsuit had been settled, that the sword would be returned, that Richard Ashford had issued a written apology. The apology itself, as part of public court records, was immediately obtained and published by multiple sources. The response was swift and unforgiving. Business partners distanced themselves from my father. Country club memberships were quietly revoked. Social invitations dried up. The man who had built his reputation on respectability and trustworthiness had been exposed as someone who would steal from his own daughter while she served in a war zone. Brandon's Instagram went private. My mother deactivated her Facebook account. The Ashford family, so concerned with appearances and social standing, discovered that some reputations couldn't be rebuilt once they were shattered. And me? I went back to work. Back to the routine of military service, the steady rhythm of duty and discipline. The commendation ceremony became a footnote, the lawsuit a concluded chapter. What mattered was the next mission, the next deployment, the next opportunity to serve. 3 days later, a delivery truck arrived at my apartment. 2 men carefully unloaded a long wooden case, handling it with the respect due to something valuable and fragile. They had me sign for it, verify the contents, confirm receipt. Alone in my apartment, I opened the case. There, cushioned in blue velvet, was my grandfather's sword. The blade gleamed despite its age, the engraving still sharp and clear. The handle, worn smooth by decades of ceremonial use, fit my hand like it had been waiting for me. I lifted it carefully, feeling the weight of it. Not just metal and craftsmanship, but history. Legacy. For generations of service, represented in steel and memory. There was a moment, holding that sword, where I allowed myself to imagine what my grandfather would think. Would he be proud of how I'd fought to reclaim it? Would he approve of the path I'd taken, the choices I'd made? I thought he would. Because I'd done it the right way. Not with anger or vengeance, but with truth and law and unwavering principle. I'd honored his memory not just by retrieving the sword, but by demonstrating the values he'd tried to instill in me. Service over self. Truth over convenience. Honor over appearance. I placed the sword back in its case, secured it properly, and put it on the shelf in my home office. Not hidden away, but displayed with the respect it deserved. A reminder of where I came from, what I valued, why I served. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek, saw the news. Sword is home. Sword is home. How does it feel? I looked at the case on the shelf, the dress blues hanging in my closet, the medals stored with care. I thought about 3,000 lives saved, missions completed, service rendered. I thought about the family I'd chosen, my team, my fellow officers, the people who understood what mattered. It feels right. Complete. Like I can finally move forward. Good. Because you've got a future ahead of you, Commander. Make the most of it. He was right. This chapter was closed. The betrayal was resolved. The sword was reclaimed. And before me stretched years of service, opportunities for impact, missions that would matter. My father had tried to diminish me, to steal from me, to rewrite the narrative of my worth. And he'd failed. Not because I'd destroyed him, though his reputation was certainly damaged. But because I'd demonstrated something more powerful than revenge, the ability to stand firm in truth, to fight for principle, to honor real values over false appearances. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out my grandfather's old photographs, the ones showing him as a young officer, full of determination and hope. I studied his face, looking for similarities, for signs of the legacy that had passed to me. We had the same eyes, I realized. The same set to the jaw when facing something difficult. The same steady gaze that suggested we'd made our choices and would stand by them regardless of consequences. He'd left me more than a sword. He'd left me an example. A template for how to serve with honor, how to lead with integrity, how to value substance over show. And I'd honored that legacy not just by reclaiming his sword, but by living the principles he'd demonstrated. The next morning, I returned to Norfolk Naval Station and reported for duty. Just another day, another mission, another opportunity to serve. The lawsuit was behind me. The media attention would fade. What remained was the work, the purpose, the commitment to something larger than myself. As I walked across the base, sailors saluted as I passed. Not because of the lawsuit or the media coverage or the family drama. But because of the rank I'd earned, the service I'd rendered, the principles I represented. That was the victory that mattered. Not defeating my father, but proving that his values, wealth, status, appearance, were hollow compared to service, sacrifice, and truth. The sword was home. The betrayal was resolved. And I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do. Everything else was just noise. And I'd learned long ago to focus on the signal. 6 months passed in the steady rhythm of military service. Deployments, training exercises, personnel reviews. The commendation ceremony became another line on my service record, the lawsuit another closed file. Life moved forward with the purposeful momentum that defined Navy life. I kept the sword in my office at home, displayed on a custom mount Derek had helped me build. Not hidden, not showcased, just present. A reminder of what had been reclaimed and why it mattered. Sometimes I'd catch sight of it while working late and remember my grandfather's hands, weathered and strong, pressing the velvet box into mine all those years ago. Ethan called one evening with news that didn't surprise me. My father had sold Ashford Manor and relocated to Florida. The business was being restructured, with Richard Ashford stepping back from public-facing roles. Brandon and his wife had moved to California, chasing fresh starts in a place where nobody knew their story. The Ashford family as I'd known it had fractured completely. Not because I'd destroyed it, but because the foundation had always been hollow. When pressure came, when truth emerged, there was nothing substantial underneath to hold it together. My mother sent a brief email months after the settlement. No apology, no acknowledgement of her silence when it would have mattered. Just a few lines about hoping I was well and suggesting that perhaps someday we could talk. I read it twice and then archived it without responding. Some bridges weren't worth rebuilding. But other connections strengthened. My Navy family grew deeper. Derek made lieutenant commander and we celebrated with terrible karaoke and good whiskey. My team from the Gulf deployment stayed in touch, scattered across different assignments but bound by shared experience. And I found myself mentoring younger officers, passing forward the lessons my grandfather had taught me about service and integrity. The story faded from headlines, as stories always do. New scandals emerged, new dramas captured public attention. My name stopped trending. The think pieces about military values versus civilian hypocrisy moved on to other examples. Eventually, even the veterans' forums found new causes to champion. But the impact lingered in ways I hadn't anticipated. Young women reached out, telling me they'd enlisted after seeing someone stand up for military values against family pressure. Soldiers dealing with their own difficult families thanked me for demonstrating that blood didn't guarantee loyalty or respect. And veterans who'd felt invisible told me the empty chairs had given voice to their own experiences of being overlooked. I hadn't meant to become a symbol. I'd just been trying to reclaim what was mine and honor my grandfather's memory. But the story had resonated because it spoke to something deeper than one family's dysfunction. It asked fundamental questions about what we value, who we honor, and whether appearance matters more than substance. The Navy promoted me to commander ahead of schedule. Captain Warren, reading the promotion letter, mentioned that my performance during the humanitarian deployment had been exemplary, but my conduct throughout the personal crisis had demonstrated the kind of leadership the Navy needed. Steady under pressure. Principled without being rigid. Strong without being brittle. On the anniversary of my grandfather's death, I wore my dress blues and visited Arlington National Cemetery. His headstone was simple, standard military issue. Just his name, rank, and years of service. No mention of wealth or status or social connections. Just the facts that mattered. He'd served with honor for 30 years. I stood there for a long time, my hand resting on the cool marble, and talked to him the way I used to when he was alive. Told him about the deployment, the lives saved, the commendation received. Told him about reclaiming the sword, about standing firm when it would have been easier to let it go. And I told him I understood now what he'd been trying to teach me all those years ago when he'd pressed that velvet box into my hands. The sword wasn't the legacy. Service was. Honor was. The willingness to stand for something real even when it cost you comfort, approval, family peace. He'd known my father would never understand that. He'd known I might have to fight to keep what he'd given me. And he'd trusted that when the moment came, I'd have the strength to do it. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight I'd been carrying since that funeral, since discovering the theft, since beginning the long fight to reclaim what was mine, all of it had finally settled into something manageable. Not forgotten, but integrated. Part of my story now, but not the whole story. My phone buzzed with a message from Derek, * beer and terrible decisions tonight? * just beer. I'm too old for terrible decisions. ***, you're 29. That's not old. ***, in deployment years, I'm ancient. ***, fair. See you at 1900. I drove back to Virginia Beach with the windows down, salt air streaming through the car. The sun was setting over the water, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, sailors were standing watch on ships I'd served on, in waters I'd navigated. The mission continued whether I was there or not, carried forward by people who understood what service meant. That night, sitting on Derek's back porch with cheap beer and good friendship, I realized I'd finally made peace with everything that had happened. My father would live with his choices, his damaged reputation, his self-imposed exile. My brother would forever be known as the man who'd worn a uniform he hadn't earned. And my mother would have to reconcile her silence with whatever remained of her conscience. But I would continue serving. Growing. Leading. Building a life defined by substance rather than appearance, by earned respect rather than inherited status, by genuine connection rather than obligatory blood ties. The sword sat on its mount in my home office, no longer a symbol of what had been stolen but a reminder of what had been reclaimed. Not just an object, but a principle. The understanding that some things were worth fighting for, that truth mattered more than peace, that honor couldn't be borrowed or bought or faked. My grandfather had known I'd understand eventually. Had trusted that when the test came, I'd choose correctly. And I had. Not perfectly, not without cost, but correctly. The stars emerged one by one over Virginia Beach, the same stars visible from ships at sea, from bases around the world, from every place where people in uniform stood watch and kept faith with principles larger than themselves. I'd served 8 years. I'd saved 3,000 lives. I'd earned every medal on my chest and every moment of respect I received. And I'd learned that real legacy wasn't about objects passed down but values lived out, not about family name but personal integrity, not about who stood beside you in easy times but who you became when tested. The sword was home. The betrayal was resolved. And I was exactly who I'd always been meant to be, my grandfather's granddaughter, a naval officer, a woman who understood that service meant something. Everything else was just details. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.